everyone, what do you think of the new intro? I haven't decided on it yet, so just thought I'd give it a try. Let me know in the comments what you think. I want to go to a story on Venezuela because this is being ramped up now to the degree where, you know, military action and tensions are starting to rise, and Russia's getting involved and China's getting involved, and this could very quickly escalate into something very, very serious. It's already extremely serious, but this could escalate into conflict or civil war very quickly. And it especially will escalate into civil war if our media in this country is sort of following the lead of the BBC as they propagandize the public and lie to them by omission. This is lies of omission. This is it that I'm about to show you. I'm going to read all of this article because this is disgusting what the BBC are doing. Propagandizing the public and lies of omission. This is unreal, honestly. What I'm about to show you is, it's criminal what they're doing. So, Venezuela crisis, deadly border clashes as Maduro blocks aid. I'm going to read all of this, okay? It should take me a few minutes, but I want you to give the full context of exactly how they are manufacturing consent for regime change in Venezuela. This is exactly what they are doing. They say this: deadly clashes broke out in Venezuelan border towns on Saturday as President Nicolas Maduro blocked humanitarian aid from crossing from Colombia and Brazil. At least 2 people were killed by gunfire on Saturday, rights groups said, including a 14-year-old boy. Who were they that were killed? Were they pro-Maduro supporters, were they? They don't say who. They don't clarify who. Venezuelan troops fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters attempting to collect and transport the aid. Funny, isn't it? They'll report on that. But, you know, I saw scenes the weekend, yesterday that were filmed in France for the weekend, which I'm going to make a video about just because they are not covering it. And it's criminal what the police are doing to the French over there in Paris. But they will not show that. But any unrest in Venezuela, yeah, let's go for it. Let's plaster it all over the website. This is what they're doing now. The opposition wants the aid to go to people hit by the economic crisis. Mr. Maduro claims it is a security threat. Right, okay. Why? US Secretary, why does he think it's a security threat, BBC? US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo condemns the attacks on civilians which he blamed on Maduro's thugs. Our deepest sympathies to the families who have died during these criminal acts. We join their demand for justice, he said in a tweet. Mr. Pompeo also described the burning of some of the aid as sickening. Now, they don't go on to describe that there was a burning of the aid. There's allegations that it's the other side, it's obviously outside Venezuela and the burning aid trucks. There's allegations that it's people on the Colombian side who are burning it. Obviously, it's not in the country yet. So it's almost like they've sabotaged the aid themselves just to write a headline. And the BBC print that without any context whatsoever. Mr. Guaido, who has been recognised as leader by dozens of nations, will meet US President Mike Pence on Monday in Bogota, Colombia. Yes, recognised by dozens of nations. Not recognised by basically every nation in Africa, but you don't include that in your figures. Not recognised by Russia and China. They do obviously go on to talk about that. But there are multiple. Mexico as well. There are way more nations opposing this than there are for it. But they just totally leave the 49 of 50 African nations or whatever it is that are actually opposing it. Leave it off there. Africa doesn't matter. It's post-colonial bias. You know, it's racism is what it is. You could make that case. He's attending a meeting in the regional Lima Group, in spite of a travel ban imposed on him by Mr. Maduro's government. The Lima Group, who control oil in South America, or trying to. On Saturday evening, Mr. Guaido posted a tweet in Spanish which implored the international community to be open to all options in order to liberate Venezuela from Mr. Maduro, who is continuing to resist all calls to stand down. Mr. Guaido organised the collection of hundreds of tons of foreign aid at the country's borders. He organised it all on his own. It wasn't the Americans who did it and just put it. The guy might as well just have CIA plant written on his forehead. I will go into that in another video. The guy's basically been educated by the CIA and these bloody groups in America. He organised a collection of hundreds of tons of foreign aid, all on his own, with no help from America or honest at all, at the country's borders. He gave the government a deadline of Saturday to allow the aid to be brought into Venezuela, or vowed to have volunteers march it in themselves. So this guy who's just declared himself president, who has got probably, you know, a fraction of the support that Maduro's got. Yes, Maduro's made horrible. It's a terrible president, Maduro is. It's not like I'm unaware of it. It's terrible. He's made some terrible decisions. But it's not like he's not trying to do the right decisions. He's trying to do the right things. But there's so much outside influence on him that is stopping him from doing it. I'll get to that in a bit. But they don't cover any of this, is what I'm saying. In response, President Maduro partly closed the country's border with Brazil and Colombia, citing threats to security and sovereignty. On Saturday, Venezuelan civilians attempted to cross in order to get the aid, which included food and medicine. What else was in that aid, BBC? It included food and medicine. What else? What aren't you telling us that it's included in that aid? What? Images from crossing points. And why is Maduro against this aid? Why is he saying it's a threat? Have you explained that, BBC, at all? You said it at the beginning. Oops, sorry. I'm getting pissed off with my fat fingers. You said it at the beginning. Maduro blocks humanitarian aid from crossing into Colombia and Brazil. And you said, went on to say, he claimed it's a security threat. Why? Why would food and medicine be a security threat, BBC? Why? Did you go on to explain that in this arse gravy of an article? Let's see. Images from crossing points across the country showed security forces firing tear gas at volunteers. Oh, it's twice they've mentioned this in the article. It's more times than they've mentioned, about the tear gas being fired on the French today, isn't it? Protesters burned outposts and threw projectiles at soldiers and riot police. Have you noticed the reporting here is all one way? There's obviously a lot of here that's causing them to do this, and there's a lot in the past in Venezuela. Groups have been funded to cause this sort of shit. The BBC don't report on any of that. Obviously, it's just it's all Maduro and Maduro supporters. It's all they're bad, regime change. This is what they're doing. Rights groups say at least 2 people. Which rights groups, BBC? Which rights groups? Wasn't the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, was it? This guy in Coventry, you seem to think he's a bloody mind reader and knows what's going on in Syria every single minute of the day, who was convicted of fraud 3 times and fled the country 4th time to avoid jail, and then got a £195,000 contract from the British government. And now do you see how they manufacture these rights groups just to say whatever narrative they want and never explain who is behind the rights groups? Here they just say rights groups. Say at least 2 people, including a 14-year-old boy, were shot dead on Saturday's clashes in Santa Elena, near the country's border with Brazil. Another 2 were reported to have killed on Friday. Amnesty International has described the use of firearms against protesters as Syrian human rights violation and crime under international law. Meanwhile, in France, you've got Gilets Jaunes protesters, their eyes being taken out left, right and centre by flashballs, and the BBC never cover it at all. It's one little article and then move on quickly. If that was in Venezuela, they would write more articles about one incident in Venezuela than they would do about the last 15 or 16 weeks about the violence in France. There have also been reports of several aid trucks being burned, something Mr. Guaido says was a violation of Geneva Convention, and something that Maduro's side is saying they're burning this on their own to create a story. Don't give that context. It's 7 p.m. local time, or 11 p.m. our time on Saturday. Colombia's government estimated the number injured at border crossings to be about 300. Journalists at the same have reported severe injuries among protesters, including several who appear to have lost their eyes. Mr. Guaido visited somewhere, blah, blah, blah. At least 60 soldiers have defected, another regime change thing, or they're all moving away from this madman dictator Maduro. Video posted on social media appeared to show 4 soldiers publicly denouncing the president. 4 soldiers. I wonder if they're the same 4 soldiers that CNN reported on. You know, those 4 Venezuelan defector soldiers who turned out not to be soldiers, not from Venezuela, and weren't defectors at all. How has Maduro reacted? President Maduro continues to oppose Mr. Guaido's claim to the presidency and has ignored international calls to hold elections. International calls from about a dozen countries where there's way more. You know, no, but it's the only countries that matter, isn't it? It's the UK, it's the United States, it's Australia, it's, you know, it's France, it's Germany, blah, blah. They're the only ones that matter. You know, the countries with white people in. As protests got underway at Venezuela's borders, Mr. Maduro staged a rally in Caracas. Take your hands off Venezuela, Donald Trump, he told a cheering crowd, accusing the US president of using the aid as a means to invade the country. Again, they don't go on to explain, do they? How is he going to use the invade the country? You're making him out like he's crazy. How is he going to invade the country by letting the aid in? They're making him out like he's a crazy person here, the BBC are. Despite dozens of countries backing the opposition leader. Again, they will push that narrative. Dozens of countries are backing the opposition leader. Dozens of countries are backing the leader. More countries are backing the leader, especially if you include the African nations that you conveniently miss out. Pro-white bias. Mr. Maduro maintains the support of key economic allies, including Cuba, Russia, and China. Didn't mention Mexico at all, didn't mention all the other countries that are standing by them. The US is leading the international effort to pressure him and has implemented a raft of financial sanctions against his government. Yes, which have crippled the country and which are causing this starvation. Humanitarian aid is the latest flashpoint in the ongoing standoff between Mr. Maduro and Mr. Guaido. Mr. Guaido is the leader of the country's opposition and dominated National Assembly. Last month declared himself the country's interim leader. He has called Mr. Maduro's rule constitutionally illegitimate because of the alleged irregularities with the 2018 general election. And again, they don't mention there that when he was elected leader, that their job was to actually create more laws and, you know, more laws. And they used that opportunity to block everything they possibly could. And although he may have a legal argument to say we can do this, Maduro and their side have got a legal argument that say no, you can't. It's one of those things. The Constitution's only 20 years old, for Christ's sake. They're still trying to figure it out and create the rules. But Guaido's there was just to stop everything that happened. It's political stuff. It goes on in every country. But they only put one side of the fucking story, the BBC do, every single time when it comes to this. And they steal £150.50 from every single household in the country for the luxury of having them propagandise and fucking lie to you and lie into another war that is going to kill people. Look at this. They started the timeline in 2013. Conveniently, you know, after Saudi Arabia had overproduced oil and driven the price of oil down and caused the crisis, they started it after that. What they're going to do next? What they're going to do next? They're going to do history of Iran-America crisis and start it in 1979? Just forget what happened 26 years previous. It's disgusting. Venezuela has been in the grip of a political and economic crisis for several years. An out-of-control inflation rate has seen prices soar, thanks to pressure from America and the IMF that are trying to cripple the country. They don't mention that. They don't mention why there's super inflation. None of it at all. It's all this bad socialist fault. An out-of-control inflation rate has seen prices soar, leaving many Venezuelans struggling to afford basic items such as food, toiletries and medicine. Mr. Guaido insists that citizens badly need help. They do. They do. And I'm going to go on to explain how really simple to give Venezuela help. Something, again, the BBC don't tell you. insists that citizens badly need help, while Mr. Maduro views aid as a ploy by the US to invade the country. Again, they've just said invade the country. How, BBC? Why would they think that? Have you given any context to it? Or do you just put that line in as if, say, Maduro's a crazy dictator, he thinks they're going to invade. He thinks they're going to open these humanitarian aid containers and SWAT teams are going to jump out. It's not that far from the truth, BBC, but that's the line that they're pushing. They're trying to make him seem crazy. It's disgusting, that was. What they missed out, this, by the way, if you haven't seen it, Empire Files with Abby Martin, their latest one, An Ocean of Lies on Venezuela, go watch it after you've seen this. If you haven't before, it's brilliant. And she talks, Abby Martin talks to, I think his name is Alfred Desir. I apologise if I've got his name on. He was the UN rapporteur who did the report that I covered in a video of when he came back from Venezuela last year, or 2017 it might have been. But a few shipments just blocked from entering Venezuela last year. This is just a few that he read off. 300,000 doses of insulin, $1.65 billion for food and medicine, $7 million for dialysis supplies for children. The Americans and the Western countries have blocked this from entering the country in the last year. And now obviously they're blocking gold, billions in gold. They're blocking that. This could all help the starving people in those countries, and that's what they are. Obviously, these are medical supplies. So Alfred Desaias, his name is. The coup is needed for humanitarian reasons, though. Don't you see? They've created this crisis. They've been withholding stuff for the last year, and now it's all piled up on the border and saying, let it in. And Maduro won't. And why won't he? Well, it's curious, isn't it? I did a search on this, right? Look at that. The word aid, 37 times in that article it's mentioned. 37. The word humanitarian twice. Strange. I did a search on there for Elliot. Couldn't find anything. Pompeo, once. John Bolton, not on there. But Elliot Abrams, curious they didn't mention him and his history. This is the guy that Trump has appointed as sort of the liaison to this Venezuela crisis. Look at what Mint Press News just bring up, just in a few paragraphs about his history. Abrams is known as the Assistant Secretary of Dirty Wars, a title he earned using his stints with the Reagan and the George Bush administrations. In 1993, after a UN Truth Commission, which examined 22,000 atrocities that occurred during the 12-year civil war in El Salvador, which attributed 85% of the abuses to the Reagan-assisted right-wing military and its death squad allies, Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights Abrams said, "The administration's record on El Salvador is one of fabulous achievement." He thinks El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Abrams organised the illegal covert financing of Contra rebels in Nicaragua behind the back of Congress, which had cut off funding. Really? So he organised the illegal covert financing of Contra rebels in Nicaragua, obviously giving them arms and weapons to start a civil war. Elliot Abrams did that. Really? Did he? Abrams lied to Congress twice about his role with the Contras. He pleaded guilty to both counts in 1991, but was pardoned by George W. Bush. This is a man who was being found guilty of smuggling arms and weapons into a country to overthrow other governments and create civil war. He's been found guilty of it and pardoned, and now he's overseeing the humanitarian aid effort in Venezuela. Can you not see what this aid effort is a guise for? Abrams was in the Bush White House at the time of the abortive coup in 2002 against the late Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez. Abrams was in the White House, in the Bush White House, the last time they tried to overthrow. They tried to do a coup in Venezuela in not the last time, 2002. That's not even the last time. There's been another one or two since. Abrams helped lead the US effort to stage a coup to overturn the results of the 2006 Palestinian elections complete with murder and torture. So this is the man who's been involved in subverting democracy in other countries throughout history. This is a man who's got a track record. It's not just Nicaragua, etc. This is just a few little paragraphs. The man's a monster. He's a monster. And the BBC didn't even mention him in their article. That's a dereliction of duty. Every single one of you should be honestly, after seeing this, send an email and complain about it to them. It's the only way you're going to change this. And the thing is, I'll get to that at the end, but also on Friday, a Wall Street Journal report confirmed suspicions that opposition leader Juan Guaido's move to declare himself interim president of Venezuela this week was highly coordinated with the Trump White House and Republican lawmakers. As far as I can tell, the BBC have not even mentioned or said that this is a possibility in every report they've written so far. If they have, please point me to it, because I can't see it. Not from all the arse graver that I've seen them write so far. And the thing is, if you say, oh, well, please, it's not, weapons, come on. Weapons, he's not going to do it this time. I know Elliot Abrams has done it every other time in every other war in South America and in the Middle East he's been involved in, but he's not going to do it this time. Really? Isn't he? Well, this is a report from McClatchy. Venezuela says plane from Miami delivered weapons for use by enemies of Maduro. I'm just going to go into it. The Boeing 767 has made dozens of flights between Miami International Airport and destinations in Colombia and Venezuela since January 11th. A flight tracking service shows, often returning to Miami for over a few hours before flying again to South America. Full of weapons. They started the day after Guaido was announced as president, and they stopped the day after this report came out. Do you think the BBC mentioned that? Of course they didn't. Of course they didn't. But here's the thing. Not only is this aid that they're trying to get into the country now, not only have the BBC not reported, listen, you know, this is all the stuff that's been withheld from them for the last year. You know, this is theirs in a way. Anyway, it's not aid, it's theirs. You know, and America always uses humanitarian aid as ruses to go in and create these, you know... Listen, don't think for a second that America will not try to create a civil war here the same as they did in Syria that lasted, what, 6-7 years. They will. That's exactly... I think that's the plan, to be honest, because obviously the military haven't defected in the numbers that they wanted. So it might be the plan. So therefore, the last thing that Maduro is going to want is weapons going into the country under the guise of humanitarian aid, just the way that Elliot Abrams and all these other neocons in Trump's cabinet have done historically. And again, just as in history, the media is going along with it. And it's so important that the BBC don't do this, because every other newspaper is going to take the BBC's lead on this. None of these other newspapers, The Independent, The Guardian, The Times, none of them. None of these outlets, the Sky, Channel 4, but ITV, none of them. ITV, Channel 5, none of these outlets are going to be reporting on this the way I've just reported it, with facts. These are facts I've just given you. It's not like I'm making this up and it's stuff that isn't relevant to that article that the BBC have written. No, this is very relevant. And the fact that it's been left out just says that they're gaslighting us. It's as simple as that. So if you do feel as passionately as I do, send them a complaint. Tell them. This has got to we've got to stop the BBC from doing this. There's a reason they can do it, of course. You know, in times gone by, a publication would go against the grain. In times gone by, there were 30 or 40 different, you know, companies out there, and one of them would just go, okay, this is wrong. We've got to tell the right story that everybody else is. And that's the way the media sort of holds each other accountable. Now you've got 4 or 5 people owning 90% of the media in this country. Now that's easy to control. In fact, you know, people have said, dictators look on in awe at the way Western countries such as the United Kingdom and the United States have their media just fall in line. Dictators are in awe of it. They would love that. The dictators look on and think, wow, wish I had a system where I could silence the press so easily as they do in the United Kingdom and United States. We've got to change this. We've got to change it. Otherwise, we're going to see more wars. We're going to see more death. We're going to see more suffering. We're going to see more immigrants and refugees as a result. More. If you think this is going to make Venezuela better, you're wrong. It's going to make it far worse. The one thing that you cannot level at Maduro and the Chavez government is how that they have really elevated and lifted up the poor. You cannot make the assertion that they haven't done that. And of course, because they cannot make that as the assertion, people like the BBC leave it out of their reports. Because, hey, that'll make people have some sympathy for the Venezuelan people, won't it? We can't have that. The BBC and the government of this country and the United States and Donald Trump and all the other neocons and the establishment and the neoliberals and all of them are lying to you with admission, like the BBC just did. And they are preparing for another regime change war, which means more death and more lies. And you know what? When it happens, the BBC, they've got blood on their hands. It's plain and simple. What that is, quite simply, this article in the BBC, that's manufacturing consent for a regime change war. And it's got to stop. And the way you stop it is obviously, we need your support, because they're not going to tell you the truth. They're just not. They're going to keep lying to you over and over again unless we stop them. For more truly honest, independent media like the video you just saw, please subscribe and click the bell below as well so you get a notification of when I drop further videos. If you also like and share and comment on the video as well, that really helps with the algorithm and boosts exposure. And if you can support me, please do so. You can do with any of the avenues on the screen at the moment and below this video. You can support me for as little as $1 a month on Patreon, and every dollar helps. We need your support at the moment. We do not have an operating fourth estate. I'm sure you're aware, a functioning media holding power accountable is vital for democracy. At the moment, we haven't got it. So people like me are having to fill their shoes and do the job for them with your support. Thanks very much for your support. Till next time. Peace and take care.